A man of the cloth once told me that certain people are put on this earth to be great at one thing, to invent or innovate. These people blaze trails for others to follow. They thrust doors open that were once closed off to the masses and offer millions the opportunity to be great just like they are. By hook or crook, these people are the pantheons of their chosen fields and serve as inspiration for countless generations. These are the greats. Y'all thought just because the commercial for the tour mentions a man in a cloth, we'd ignore some of the more infamous greats, huh? Well, the good father was right in some ways, but we'll be taking a very long tour through as many greats as we can, and I promise you, ladies and gentlemen, you will get your money's worth out of this tour. And I'm gonna get it all back in concessions and gift shops. Let's start the tour. Now, if you'll look at your pamphlet, you'll see that our first subject for the tour is the great Robert Johnson, born in 1911 in the hot Mississippi heat mud. Now, you can put those away and enjoy the rest of the tour because we're gonna have pictures and video for you to enjoy. Because the great Mr. Johnson only has 2 known pictures of him and no videos, most of this tour is gonna be dramatizations. Now, I see all those faces you're making. And I know most of you, if not all of you, have zero idea who Robert Johnson is, but let me assure you, his influence can be felt all throughout music. Blues, rock and roll, and beyond have felt his touch on the great music industry, and he is the first member of the 27 Club, a tragic list of individuals that are made up of superstars who burn twice as bright as their peers, but sadly only lasted half as long, taken entirely too soon by their poisonous vices and addictions. Here we go, Hazelhurst, Mississippi, sometime in 1911, theorized May 8th. I say theorized, ladies and gentlemen, because the actual birth certificate is something we can't locate. So most of his early life and early teen life is hearsay, theory, and mostly legends. It is commonly known, however, that his mother was married to a man named Charles Dodds, a very wealthy and well-off landowner and furniture maker. Being a very prosperous African-American family that early in American history is near impossible. It is impossible, however, to have all that money and keep your life, because having all that money as a black man makes Whitey unhappy, and when Whitey ain't happy in early America, nobody is happy. They took all that unhappiness that they felt and constructively decided they were just going to lynch Mr. Charles and his poor wife Julia, just to be safe. Having to flee Memphis to escape the mob and being separated from her husband, Julia is left broke and homeless, eventually meeting a man named Noah Johnson. This man will become Robert Johnson's actual father, and this begins the actual early life of Robert Johnson, of which we have no knowledge on. Seriously, folks, if you were to look it up right now, it would just have a big blank and assume that he moved around a lot. Some think he split up from his mother and later rejoined her. However, we can safely assume that he got a basic education because Robert Johnson did know how to read. Anyway, years go by and eventually his mother remarries to some piece of shit sharecropper who apparently abused the young Johnson boy because he didn't want to work the field and he saw it all as a sucker's game. Smart kid. However smart Johnson may have been in the early 1900s, there's literally nothing but the fields to do for an African-American man. That was the only way he was about to get money, well, outside of robbing banks and playing guitar, which is what Robert Johnson turned to. He had massive hands and very long fingers. He started self-teaching himself to play guitar. Some sources say his half-brother taught him the basics. Again, very unclear. Robert was enthralled by the idea of playing the guitar and the blues. Out there on the field where there was no hope, music was seen as a balm and was used to lift even the heaviest shoulders. The blues originated in the fields both during and after the Civil War, and it's heavily based on the suffering of African American slaves. It's heavily based on their work songs. It started in the fields, and don't ever let no one tell you it began in a church house. Suffering and the enduring of that suffering serves as the backbone of the blues, allowing the guitar to carry those feelings over to the listener. I bet most of you feel like blues is all about a woman leaving them, In reality, in the early to mid 1900s, the songs that talk about heartbreak is a cover. They ain't talking about no woman. They talking about boss man, the sharecropper that owns them. Yeah, someone go hurt you the way you hurt me. The blues as an art form is the voice of the depressed and downtrodden. It is only with the sharing of those blues that can help lift your shoulders in a cathartic sense. And if there were people around, you could bet your bottom dollar of blues players somewhere around transmitting those downtrodden feelings. They would perform literally anywhere and everywhere they could to get a quarter, nickel, dime, change, not even whole dollars, but that's what it took to survive on the street as a blues artist. Playing on street corners and sidewalks would act as a form of free advertisement, get the word out that a good player was in town, and one of them good juke joint owners might come and ask you to play at a place for them. Now that's where the money is, or scamming humans out of their hard-earned money to talk about dead folk. A juke joint is a club mostly populated by black folks looking to escape the doldrums of the field work. Positivity, togetherness, coupled with live music is a beautiful thing, ain't it? Not everybody was happy though. Remember that little tidbit I said about the church? Well, Christianity was not kind to the blues at all, which is why I get a little peeved when people think that it was born in a church house. It was a common belief in Christianity that blues was a part of the devil's music. This ridiculous rumor was started by the church itself because the church wasn't making no money, but the juke joint up the road was, making it hand over fist by the boatload in fact. Preacher man starts his sermon with the warnings that you shouldn't be listening to that devil music. Now good Christians always listen to their pastor, and once that rumor started, it permanently tainted the image of the blues. Now that you know about why blues is so tainted, let's get back to Robert Johnson, who unsurprisingly had even less known about him at this age. One very well-known legend suggests that Robert fell in love with a good Christian girl. And in there lies the problem. It's the church again. But instead of bucking the system like he should have, apparently Robert Johnson put down his guitar and became a farmhand when she got pregnant. He did right by his woman. His wife leaves to have her a baby, and Robert follows her the long way with guitar in hand, deciding he's gonna travel some of his old haunts and meet up with his new family back with her grandmother. The blues in church, old as time itself. Stop me if you heard this one, folks. Robert comes home to discover that his love is dead and she died in childbirth with his baby. And all her family can do is blame him because he was out playing that devil's music. It's enough to break a man. Robert's life changed as his heart hardened to the entire world and he threw himself into his music with aspirations of being big. Here's the thing about being big though. You kind of have to be good at your craft to do it. Till this point, Robert is a novice guitar player and not one that's making strides and improving his play. People would actually pay him to stop playing. He had this nasty little habit of hopping on stage at a juke joint to play his little tunes after the real talent got off stage and went back for a smoke break. It's strange how he's been playing since he was old enough to be useful in the field, but he's still a poor excuse for a guitar player. They ran that poor man out of those clubs with one final straw broken. He said, "One day, I'll show you all." Supposedly, this is what he said. What is known is that this man disappeared. What isn't known is how long he disappeared. Some say 1 year, some say up to 3 years. This man's known life is an absolute mess, and this is more mythology at this point than anything else. He did disappear from the Delta, from everywhere. No one knew where he went, and there's no evidence to prove where he went. Banks, Mississippi is the place he officially returned to. We only know this because Son and Willie Brown were playing at a juke joint around that same time when Robert Johnson walked in carrying the same tired-looking guitar. You can guess their reaction, and it's pretty obvious what it was. Oh, here comes little Robert Johnson with that little guitar again. It's amazing now he's been gone for so long and people still remember how bad he was. But he convinced him to let him play a little something on set after their session. One thing we do know about that old Dustin noisemaker he carried was that he had a 7-string cross a 6-string guitar. That little something he played had jaws on the floor. Something amazing was being born that night. He was making that guitar work like a house on nickel night, ladies and gentlemen. I mean, he made it go waka waka until it was so good it was bad. What I mean is he was one bad mother. Moving on, ladies and gentlemen. The point is, Jaws was hitting the floor with a thump. Suddenly, this poor to below average guitar player had come back a god of the instrument and were teaching the experts how to play. To this day, we are still studying how he played. It's made even harder by the fact that he would turn his back to you if he caught you watching how he played. You probably ask yourself the same question they were asking all those years ago. How did he manage to get this good? 1 year to 3 years? That doesn't mean anything. To play an instrument, it takes your whole life and dedication, but Robert Johnson managed to make it look easy. Well, that's when the rumors started. Playing all that devil music, playing better than the best in such a short amount of time. Oh, the church were having a field day with this one. You see, as the legend goes, Robert Johnson made a deal with the devil. As legend goes, Robert Johnson went down to the crossroads, got down on his knees and handed his guitar to the big man himself to tune it, and in return, he paid the price of his immortal soul. The entire world treated Robert Johnson like he was the bad guy since he was old enough to pick up the guitar, and it only seemed right for him to give them something real to hate. It's enough to break your heart, isn't it? Being ostracized by your own people and the entirety of the church. Another thing that fed the flames of that rumor is the fact that Robert's supposed mentor, Ike Zimmerman, down over in Hazelhurst, Mississippi, had a particular way of teaching. You see, Mr. Zimmerman believed that if you practice in the graveyard, the haints, which is another word for a ghost, will come out and teach you the true meaning of the blues. There ain't nothing more blue than the damned and departed. Can you dig it? Robert's 7-string style had a multitude of different sound effects that he could create from his guitar. Oftentimes he could make it sound like two were playing at once, or he could make it sound like a piano was playing by strumming his fingers along the bass. I'm not saying that the big man tuned the guitar, but I'm saying whoever tuned that guitar for him just knew how to make it sing, you know? Robert still wanted a family, and he found love in his second wife, bagged him a nice church girl again. I don't blame him. I'm quite fond of the good at church girls myself. He met this young woman and successfully sired himself a son named Claude Johnson, who had no relationship with his father on account of his mother's family keeping the two away from one another. You know, on account of he still played that damn music. Gotta watch myself there. Almost out now. Don't want to go right back. From there, Robert Johnson begins a downward spiral. Once again, treated like the bad guy, scorned, and now burned from any attempts at a quiet life. He devotes his entire life now to womanizing and hard drinking. His heart was stone and nothing else mattered but his music. He wore his blasphemy like a title of pride. Mr. Johnson's womanizing ways will be the thing that finally does him in, though. One night while playing at a juke joint, Robert Johnson decides to get frisky with the owner's woman. This led to somebody, we don't know who, being angry enough to poison his whiskey that night. 2 days of hard suffering in a bed alone, Mr. Robert finally died. No investigation, the owner was white. Black folk didn't push for any pressure on the investigation, cause you know what Robert Lee Johnson's saying. Abandoned by his own people, he was left to be forgotten. He wouldn't be forgotten for very long because sometime in 1938, a man named John Hammond put together a little venue at Carnegie Hall in New York City about the history of jazz, blues, and swing all together, and he wanted none other than the great Robert Johnson to be the opening act. He sent one of his scouts down there to Mississippi to find Mr. Robert, but as it turns out, Johnson's been dead for over 6 months. To keep the dream alive, the segment that he set aside for Robert, an old phonograph was placed out there on stage so the audience could have the pleasure of listening to the man himself one last time. This last time of him playing was enough to keep his legacy alive from here on out. As the great Muddy Waters, who was a famous blues player, is inspired by Robert. B.B. King, even Led Zeppelin 2 has a line that's literally a Robert Johnson original. The first of the Rolling Stones was a massive fan of the late artist. This is a fitting way to end the first member of the 27 Club. Robert Johnson's legacy will live on in music till the day music stops playing.